Welcome to Unprecedented, a podcast here on Legal AF dedicated to what's happening and developments at the United States Supreme Court. We take it from the perspective of cases that are at the court, soon to be at the court, emergency docket and shadow docket rulings, full-blown appeals, statements made by Supreme Court justices while they're on their summer vacation, book tours, you name it, ethics, if it relates to the Supreme Court. Dina Doll and I are on the scene and at that intersection. And we're back for our new episode. A lot to talk about, even though normally this is still the dog days of summer, Dina. And except where Donald Trump's administration is involved, we normally don't talk about much because there isn't much to talk about before the opening of the new term, which is in this case, I think, the 7th of October. But because of all the emergency and shadow dockets and that are the bread and butter of this Trump administration and its Solicitor General, we got a lot to talk about. We'll talk about the ruling on shadow docket in one paragraph that took the Fourth Amendment and put it in the trash against illegal, unconstitutional searches and seizures related to a California case. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about what's happening with the tariffs of Donald Trump. And now that there's been new scheduling to put that issue front and center in November before the United States Supreme Court, we have a decision related or another emergency decision about whether a 95-year-old precedent called Humphrey's Executor is still precedent or not. It looks like it's on life support. We've got a ruling related to transgender Americans' rights and their ability to go to the bathroom from the United States Supreme Court. In an interesting twist, it's not what you think. Let's bring in Dina Doll. Hey, Dina, how are you?
I'm okay. Glad to be doing this show with you. As you said, you called it months ago. The Supreme Court wasn't going to take a break. They're not taking a break. This Supreme Court, we wish, would take a break, however, because of how many bad decisions they're going. Go to Europe, Alito. We know you love it.
That's
Go
true.
there and stay there.
Absolutely. I agree with you. But, here we are. Why don't you kick it off with what happened with the Fourth Amendment? You got Judge Frimpong, right, in California, your neck of the woods, in Central District, makes an amazing, proper ruling about what constitutes a reasonable suspicion for a stop by immigration to ask you for your papers and ask you to justify your existence in America, which, as was being applied by the Trump administration, made this country not America. Talk about Frimpong's decision. Then it goes to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, unanimously upheld, but the Supremes had another idea about what constitutes reasonable suspicion in America. I want you to tell our audience about it.
I mean, honestly, this decision is as bad as you think it is. Sometimes, there's a nuance behind it, but this is a very disturbing decision. They essentially allowed racial profiling. Now, I just want to make this really clear. This is having to do with detainment. There are two different standards. In order to detain somebody briefly, you need reasonable suspicion. In order to arrest somebody, you need probable cause. So those are two different terms, two different criteria. This case was dealing with the detainment, which needed reasonable suspicion. But reasonable suspicion, although isn't as high as probable cause, still requires specific facts and circumstances where the person thinks that there is a suspicion that a crime is ongoing or whatever reason they're trying to enforce a law, somebody's violating that law. Okay. So the district court judge, just well thought out. There was so much evidence that they were clearly racially profiling. They weren't asking whether or not that particular individual was acting suspicious or if there were facts and circumstances that that particular individual was undocumented. They were instead using classic racial profiling. They were using if somebody spoke in an accent, if they spoke a different language, Spanish here, whether or not they were working the type of jobs that were typically used by an undocumented person. Those kind of broad stereotypical categories that are racial profiling. So the district court judge said, clearly, this is unconstitutional. You're not meeting whether or not that person is doing something in a way to rise to the level of reasonable suspicion. Justice Kavanaugh, I have said this before, he is my least favorite on the court, even though he's not so extreme, because he tries to act like he's this reasonable person. But he, again and again, like with his decision around Dobbs, again and again, he seems to just does not care about civil rights in this country. He says it is, quote, common sense for them to have essentially racially profiled people in this country. He also cites a fact that Solicitor General Sauer had cited in the brief with absolutely no actual evidence, saying that in Los Angeles, there were 2 million undocumented people. The statistic is actually in the state of California, there are 2 million undocumented people. This is where their rushed shadow docket shows how bad it is to make such important law like this, because he's not even citing a fact that's true. But even assuming that's true, are you talking about 10% of the people in Los Angeles, and somehow that justifies you racially profiling people in Los Angeles? Justice Sotomayor, just a stinging dissent, calling out, you may be okay to do it to this group, but make no mistake, these types of decisions aren't limited to this group. And I think that when you take this acceptance of racially profiling and you combine it with what Trump is doing, and frankly, what Trump just said, on Fox News, he talked about the radical left, right, being so extremist and dangerous. His rhetoric, frankly, is very scary. And when you combine that, like, you can see the momentum of them trying to go after the left. They're already labeling them as like domestic terrorists, along with this ability to just round people up. You can use that easily, right? Are you going to round up Democrats at like their Democratic club because they're associating now with, some move on group or whatever? This is dangerous. It's horrific for people in this country who speak a different, my father speaks with an accent. He's not Hispanic, but he speaks with an accent. He came here from another country, came here for the American dream, federal employer his entire life. He worked for the federal government. But hey, he has the wrong color skin. He has an accent. According to this, he could be asked his papers. He can be detained. It's disgusting. It's un-American. And this Supreme Court, Justice Kavanaugh, with his smugness, his privilege, he shows it again and again and again. It's not common sense, Kavanaugh. It's unconstitutional and frankly un-American.
Absolutely. You got Kavanaugh, who blithely passes over the record that this is the problem on purpose. They're complicit in Trump's exploitation of the shadow docket, because it allows them to ignore those pesky little things like facts in the record. So when Judge Frimpong develops the record that shows that these people are being aggressively pursued, tackled, zip-locked, thrown up against walls, having their arms wrenched behind them during immigration stops, how does Kavanaugh summarize that? I don't think it's an inconvenience to be asked a couple of questions before you're sent on your way by law enforcement about your immigration status. Sotomayor said, are you effing, her version, are you effing kidding me? Mm-hmm. That's not what's happening in the streets of America. Open your eyes, look at the record. And that's why these factors of what you look like, what you sound like, and where you work effectively can never be and should never be part of reasonable suspicion analysis, even under a totality of the circumstances, which is what Kavanaugh. Why shouldn't it be? Why should you have to ignore that? The point is targeting people who happen to be at the Home Depot parking lot who are, for my friends who are both Republican and Hispanic, and I have a number of them, I would be careful going to a Home Depot parking lot with your family and talking about your shopping list in Spanish in the parking lot, because you just gave reasonable suspicion for somebody to burst out the back of a U-Haul and throw you to the ground. Because that is the America that was just created in one paragraph in a shadow docket. I would have thought if they were going to rip the Fourth Amendment out of its place in our Constitution, they would have at least had the decency to do it on a full-blown, after oral argument, 100-page decision, so that you and I and our audience and law enforcement and other judges would know what the heck just happened. Instead of just saying, block on Frimpong, we'll pick it up later if and when there's ever an appeal. And then we're left with Kavanaugh, which apparently all the right wing adopted or are okay with because nobody else wrote anything. And then you've got the battle again of Sotomayor and Kavanaugh, or Ketanji Brown Jackson and Amy Coney Barrett, or whatever. And by the way, you're seeing that battle go on right before we start this. We got competing books out, right?
Yeah.
We got Sotomayor out with her book. We've got Amy Coney Barrett with her whining, oh, I'm not liked anymore. My kids are picked on. Oh, all I'm doing is applying the law. It's not I don't know why I'm whining so much. It's not a poll. Oh, we don't use originalism as a way to, I mean, are you again, intellectually dishonest shilling of her book to justify her $2 million advance?
Mm-hmm.
You know? Whereas Sotomayor, right off of this Fourth Amendment decision we're talking about, goes on Colbert, soon to rest in peace, gets a standing ovation and talks as much as she can about the decision making about it and the country that we are now living in, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you pick up from the Sotomayor and Amy Coney Barrett book tour?
Amy Coney Barrett book tour, I was really disturbed by it. We've been hoping that she's a swing vote that we can count on, but she just seemed to, she was not giving an inch in terms of the reality of what is going on. And that's bothered me. She was like, we're not in a constitutional crisis. I don't even see what a constitutional crisis could look like. And then when they were asking her about like whether or not there's 3 terms, she was like, well, that's what the amendment says, and she couldn't even that's the most obvious yes. And then when they were asking her about whether or not the rights to not gay marriage, but just, like same-sex marriage were fundamental and foundational. And she said yes, because that's what we've said. And frankly, when what you said keeps changing year by year, that doesn't give me a whole lot of comfort.
The gaslighting and the smugness between Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett is just remarkable. I called it intellectually dishonest in a number of my critiques of her, I guess is the right way to phrase it. Tariffs are all in the news. Donald Trump's entire economy and national and foreign policy are predicated on his tariff program, a tariff program that's on life support after 10 out of 14 different judges across 2 courts have all said he doesn't have the statutory power under a unique statute passed by Congress to impose these types of tariffs, which would wreck 2/3 of his tariff revenue. And all the things that he cried about to the courts and the trial court about the tariffs. Oh, I won't be able to make peace in the world without my tariffs. We're in delicate negotiations with the Russians. That was 2 weeks ago. How's that delicate negotiating going? Russia just invaded Poland. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump said it was an accident. Like they didn't realize where the border was with Poland.
Right.
I mean,
all 19 drones.
Right. So they just, and attacked Kiev, including government buildings, which are now set on fire. So how are the tariffs doing? Not well. So the Supreme Court, the parties got together, and for whatever reason on the Trump side, they were okay with not having it be a shadow docket emergency appeal. Tell our audience what's going to happen in November and what we should expect.
Well, to your point, both sides wanted the Supreme Court to decide this quickly because the small businesses taking a case were like, this is a disaster for our business, this chaos. So they are going to be looking at this case, or the oral arguments the Supreme Court's oral arguments is going to be the first week of November, that November 3rd week. We will, as you said, have it live here on Legal AF. You and I are just, we'll discuss it for sure, maybe in real time in addition to on this show. And so we will decide once for all. We heard Trump again, on Fox talk about how we're going to have to, if he loses at the Supreme Court, give back trillions of dollars to other countries. Of course, other countries aren't the ones paying these tariffs. It's the small businesses, the larger businesses. That's why it's the businesses bringing this decision. But he continues to lie about that. And that is their essential argument to the Supreme Court, which is, we have done this too many times. Our tariffs have brought in so much money. You can't change this now, which is not a legal argument, certainly not a legal argument if you're committing a crime or if you are doing something unlawful. But that seems to be their argument to the American people and perhaps to these justices too, which is, let us do what we want because we're too big to fail. We'll see how that goes. But although we keep getting disappointed about the Supreme Court, it's possible here that they might actually side with the small businesses because that's the one area the Supreme Court seems to actually be protecting the rights. And that's in the terms of the businesses. The spring term, they allowed a retailer to have standing essentially to sue around an FDA ruling of vapes. So this Supreme Court is very pro-business. So this might be more of a struggle for Trump to get his way versus cases where we're dealing with, frankly, civil rights in this country.
Yeah, and I think if the Supreme Court is being intellectually honest, and that's a big assumption, then they'll apply what they developed during the Biden administration, which is something called the major questions doctrine. And they should rule that since Congress has not clearly spoken and has not expressly delegated the tariffs to Donald Trump, that is a major question that the Congress would have to speak on. We can't interpret it from stray language in the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, since it doesn't mention the word tariffs. We can't assume that that's what Congress wanted to do. And if Congress wants to do that, they need to speak clearly on this major question with a new law. That's what they should do in striking down the tariffs. And they should ignore the noise around this led by Donald Trump and his economic advisors that are telling the Supreme Court, the entirety of the American economy is resting on you affirming the tariffs. I mean, first of all, that's not my problem. That shouldn't be the problem of the United States Supreme Court. It's either whether it is statutorily, constitutionally a proper delegation of this power from Congress to the president or not. And if it isn't, then the fact that, but we've collected so much money. I mean, that's, I've used this before. That's like saying that the bigger the bank heist, the more of a defense the robber has. But I stole billions. Okay, you might have, you applaud you for the audacity of your theft, but that's not a defense to your case. The hundreds of billions of dollars of collected tariffs when you had no power to collect them means you got to give it back. You got to give the money back. And so that's the way it should be framed. But as we've outlined for the last year or more on Unprecedented, the one consistent thing about this MAGA Supreme Court is its inconsistency, and that they reverse engineer to reach a place that they want to be, and they'll grab out of the toolbox all sorts of different this isn't a major question. You'll see no reference to major question in this particular ruling, whereas in another ruling they go, of course, Joe Biden trying to forgive student loans, that's a major question. Or they use originalism or the textual analysis of the Constitution when it fits their needs. When they can't find it there, they throw it out. They use historical antecedents and say, well, in old-timey times, our founders didn't do that type of gun regulation when that helps them, and they toss it when it doesn't. That's the part that, this we're just calling balls and strikes, attitude is just gaslighting America about how they're really creating the law, because they are activist judges that are effectively ruling by fiat And they don't really care what the facts of the case are. They don't really care what the record is. They just want to express a doctrine or benefit a branch like the presidency of Donald Trump. And that's it. They can't do anything. They'll use any means to get there. And then we got to call them out. And this is why the integrity of the reputation of the Supreme Court is such in the trash. It's not helping them, these paragraph rulings that give no guidance to the federal courts and no guidance to the American people at a time where look, I may not agree with them, but give me the 100 pages to tell me how you got there.
Yeah.
And then I'll digest it and I'll get back to you. Not, we're blocking this, we're blocking that. See you next time. Like, what? Sorry? Fourth Amendment?
And federal judges are speaking out about it. They're upset because they're the ones dealing with these really difficult cases and getting no guidance to the Supreme Court. And I feel like this is a perfect segue into the FTC decision.
Let's do it.
Because talk about the most ironic use of the shadow docket. They basically gutted independent agencies, which is the whole purpose of independent agencies is accountability and transparency. And they gutted accountability and transparency with the shadow docket, with zero transparency, zero accountability. So, yeah, but that's the reality. So basically, to the point of the FTC, as we've talked about, Humphrey's executor, the precedent, the member was an FTC member, could not be removed by the president because this is an independent agency created by Congress, meant to be serving administration by administration and not politically appointed. But we saw, Justice Roberts gut that already. He chipped away at that precedent in 2020 when he allowed Trump during his first term to remove somebody on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And this is how Chief Justice Roberts likes to get things done. He didn't want Dobbs to happen, not because he didn't want to overturn Roe, but he wanted to overturn it slower. He likes to chip away a precedent instead of just changing it. But that's so when he chipped it away in 2020 and his reasoning was, well, the president can't remove somebody if they were the sole person on the board, but he can remove it if they're one of many. It didn't make any sense. It was just like, to your point that you just made, we're going to pick and choose, right? It's like you're an independent agency or you're not. You're politically appointed or you're not. But he made his little argument. He chipped it away. He watered down Humphreys, and then now the shadow docket gutted it, despite the fact that we have zero opinion on it. Technically, no law, but a gutting of it.
Well, Rebecca Slaughter should be keeping her job because she is the modern day Humphreys. She is a Federal Trade Commission commissioner. So is Humphreys. She was fired without cause. So is Humphreys. Humphreys has been on the book for 95 years. And to hear the other side argue, well, the FTC of today, Federal Trade Commission today, is different. It's outgrown Humphreys. In what way? In no way has it outgrown Humphreys. And if they want to just take Humphreys out in the back and shoot it, which is what apparently they're going to do, because they're signaling that Humphreys is dead because they're letting her be fired, and not because that would have been a perfect. What we call it is on all fours. The case is on all fours. It's the same agency. It's the same role. It's the same 95-year-old precedent. And we talked last week about, in anticipating this, or I certainly did a hot take on it, the 2-1 decision of Millett, Pan, and it was Childs and Pan. I'll have to get that right. Anyway, 2-1 decision by the Circuit Court, the DC Court of Appeals, in which they said, we're going to apply the 95-year-old precedent because this person is Humphreys. If you want to change it, then you do your job. But they literally said to the Supreme Court, you do your job. And now we've got the result 4 or 5 days later. You're out of a job and we'll litigate over it.
Right.
And now we're going to see, they're going to make this is the bad law that's going to come out of this. They're going to say, except for the Federal Reserve, every other agency and commission that you can think of, despite the fact it was created by Congress with the expressed intention for it to be nonpartisan, we are going to allow the president to have complete control over it and fire at will. That's what they're going to say. That's where we're going.
Yeah. And it's because the business,
Right.
you follow the money. When you have a business up against Trump, then maybe the business will win. Financial interests.
Here's the silver lining. Humphrey's executor is about to be overturned. Good. So when it's a Democratic president and there's a whole bunch of holdover Republicans on there, so long, you're off. You're off immediately. Upon arrival, submit your resignation. On every commission, we're going to jam pack them with Democrats. We're going to, I hate to say it, but this is what we have to do. Since they've removed the element of bipartisan or nonpartisanship from all of these commissions, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the National Labor Relations Board, the Merit Service Protection Board, and the list goes on, then what's good for the goose is good for the gander, that we will do the exact same effing thing. Because what we see right now, we're always in that hermetically sealed moment, right? Oh, shit, Trump just got benefited again. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what time is it? How much longer for this administration? Because these laws are on the books, and now they stand for those propositions.
Absolutely. The only problem, though, frankly, the people who do suffer are businesses and Americans, because it is bad for business to have regulations change every 4 years. Our allies, now that we're getting in and out of treaty, the climate change treaty and in and out of tariffs, they're like, we're not going to do business with you anymore. If every 4 years you change your mind, stability, being regular is so important. And so they can't get the Supreme Court, who is very pro-business, needs to wrap their mind around your point. We're going to do this too, because that's the worst thing for business. Regulations are a pain. A lot of businesses don't like it. But what's worse is changing how you have to do business every 4 years.
Right. And the regulation of business. Well, that's why Wall Street and the investment community, domestically and worldwide, isn't so concerned about the harshness of the regulation or the board. They just need to know what the rules are, and then they'll play the game.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you attack this, as you said, and you destabilize the number one thing that the business community needs in order to make investment, in order to hire people for jobs, in order to plan manufacturing and goods and services, is the reliability of the rules of the game and the rules of the road. And when you have an unstable president coupled with the turnover at all of these major agencies, which will happen again, then you undermine the investability of America. Both foreign countries and sovereign wealth not wanting to invest in America because it's so unstable and so what's the word I'm looking for? It's unstable.
Yeah, unpredictable.
Right word. Unpredictable. And American people that are on the other, you got the workers, but then you got the owners of capital, and the owners of capital hate what is happening at the United States Supreme Court. Everyone sometimes asks me, why are there so many cases in Delaware? It's because people incorporate in Delaware because there is a consistency about the Delaware Business Court, the Court of Chancery, that's been there for 100 years or more. And people want to be there because they know they're going to get a fair shake, and they know this is a business court that is really, really sophisticated. All they do is corporate. All they do is businesses. All they do is things about businesses and companies and corporations and public corporations. They don't have to worry about, I wonder which judge we'll get. I wonder if he'll know anything about these issues. That's why. But we don't have that at the United States Supreme Court. None of these people have ever gotten a paycheck from a business. None of them have ever owned a business. Yeah. So they're the worst kinds.
Yeah.
And they don't care. Let's move on to our we talked about that. Let's talk about the transgender case, which is a little bit sort of shocking. We've got a ruling based on a South Carolina law that banned people transgender males or others from using the bathroom of choice. And I would have thought, well, here we go. But the Supreme Court has blocked that South Carolina rule, upheld for now a decision by the I guess it's the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals over that area, and is allowing transgender students to use the bathroom of choice for now, finding that there's not a lot of harm to the government in allowing this to happen while the full appeal is litigated.
Mm-hmm.
What you make about this? What's your take on it?
We just get a win every once in a while. I think this is them throwing us a bone because we've seen, obviously, with Skrmetti last term, that when it comes down to it, they don't actually support trans rights. But it is true that in terms of the harm, people have children in schools have been allowed to use bathrooms of their choice in California for years and years and years and years. I imagine this is happening across the country, even if it's not outwardly known or talked about. And it's not as if you see an actual harm being articulated, otherwise you would see, frankly, like a bunch of lawsuits and things like that. So I think that the Supreme Court here, thankfully did the right thing in allowing this until, again, this is just an intermediary position here. This case will continue to go forward, and perhaps the Supreme Court might take it and change, and articulate a more widespread law. But
yeah, it's interesting when it comes to the harm, because they need to balance under the standard that they use about whether they're going to issue an injunction or not, or a stay. There's factor analysis, and one of the factors is the harm to the government in having, state or federal, in having the law blocked or not blocked. And when it comes to people in their jobs getting fired, at the highest
mm-hmm.
level, like these commissioners and heads of these agencies that we talked about earlier, they're always now siding, the 6-3 majority is siding with, the harm to the president and having to continue to have somebody that he doesn't want in the executive branch position is just, it's intolerable. It's just, so we're going to grant the stay. But when it comes to this, it's like, if there's transgender people in a bathroom, all right, we'll deal with that later on the appeal. Doesn't mean, that's why I want to focus. It doesn't mean they're going to ultimately rule for transgender rights, transgender people rights. But this is, like you said, once in a while we get a win, we got to take it.
We get a win, and we will, and we just discussed this last week, but we will be seeing an oral argument this term on the rights of transgender with sports. Yeah. So they are taking up the issue, a slice of the issue, let's say, each term. So who knows? Maybe next term we'll see something with bathrooms. But
just to remind everybody, we will, as we've been doing now for the last 6 months on a regular basis, up on Legal AF Live. Go to the playlist for Live. You will see oral arguments for the United States Supreme Court, for the DC Court, any kind of oral argument we think is interesting that you need to watch and we'll be able to do commentary on. We have up there in real time a live stream. 60, 80, or 100,000 people join us at any given time. We've done other things too. We've put up Jay Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman's speech in Jackson Hole. People found that interesting. So if I think it's interesting, or the group thinks it's interesting, we'll get it up on that live. Speaking of live, there's ways to support what we do here on Legal AF. If you like what we're doing here, then, and what Dina does on a regular basis, hit the subscribe button for Legal AF and see her work and the work of a dozen other contributors. I do a fair number of videos to start off the day, and then we bring in the other contributors as the day progresses. And then we've got, and so that's cheap. There's no paywall. Just become a member. And this is our push for the weekend, because if we can get about 8,000-ish more people to subscribe, which is free, we will cross 800,000 before at our 1 year birthday or anniversary.
Nice.
We formed the channel September the 17th. We're coming up on September 17th. We're short just a few. If we can get there, what a great accomplishment to have this right out of the gate, have it be almost, getting on our way to 1 million. And then we've got Legal AF Substack, which supports Legal AF and all of its contributors. I do 2 live a day on Substack. Sometimes I do it with Dina. You and I haven't done one yet.
We have to do one. I think next week. Let's do it.
Good. I've been doing it regularly with Katie Fang, with Michael Cohen. I'm doing one right after we get off this recording with Michael Cohen, with Adam Parkomenko, and different people we bring on there. Besides that, we've got written analysis. We've got ad-free versions of the podcasts, all sorts of things that I think you're really going to enjoy at Legal AF Substack, and become a member there. We're up to 80,000 Substack subscribers, and we could use more paid. I think it's like $6 or $7 a month, but I promise you a return on your investment. There's amazing 10, 12 postings a day that we're doing on Legal AF Substack, and that is the way to support our Legal AF ecosystem. So until our next Unprecedented next week, we got Dina Doll and Popok. Shout out to the Mighty Mighty and the Legal AFers. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.